To most of us, a lush forest is just a giant oxygen factory. We learn early that plants spend days soaking up sunlight to photosynthesize, creating their own food and pumping out the fresh oxygen we breathe. But when the sun goes down, that production line grinds to a halt. Photosynthesis stops completely. Yet the plant itself is still working. It's growing roots, absorbing soil nutrients, and repairing cellular damage, all of which requires a constant supply of energy. To access the energy stored within those chemical bonds during the night, plants must do the exact opposite of what they're famous for. They have to consume oxygen, just like we do. A plant is an active, living engine locked in a 24/7 effort for its own survival through a continuous process called cellular respiration. Animals rely on a centralized heart and lungs to move oxygen through the body. A tree, despite its massive size, lacks a pumping mechanism to distribute gases to distant cells. Instead, gas exchange is decentralized. Roots, bark via lenticels, and leaves via stomata take in oxygen independently. Zooming in, the leaves' loosely packed parenchyma cells create an interconnected network of microscopic air spaces, ensuring every cell has a steady oxygen supply. Relying on this localized diffusion, the plant quietly secures the exact amount of gas it needs. And that steady supply of oxygen is the absolute requirement for the complex energy production happening deep inside every single cell. Pushing through the rigid cell wall into the fluid cytoplasm, we find exactly where that stored food is waiting to be used. This represents the first step in harvesting that fuel, glycolysis. Here, a 6-carbon glucose molecule undergoes a series of enzymatic reactions, cracking it directly in half to form 2 distinct 3-carbon chains known as pyruvic acid. This initial breakdown yields a tiny amount of ATP, the usable energy currency of the cell. But notice what's missing: oxygen. Glycolysis is completely anaerobic, making it the universal starting line for energy production in almost every living organism on Earth. Once the pyruvic acid is formed, the cell faces a choice. If a plant's roots are flooded and cut off from oxygen, it must resort to fermentation. This survival tactic produces ethanol and carbon dioxide, but barely yields enough energy to keep the cell alive. To release the massive energy payload within the pyruvic acid, molecules must leave the cytoplasm and travel into the cell's specialized power plant, the mitochondria. Upon entering the fluid matrix of the mitochondria, the pyruvic acid immediately undergoes a transition called the link reaction. It's modified into a compound called acetyl-CoA, preparing it for the next phase of processing. This compound enters the Krebs cycle. Here, a cyclical series of chemical reactions systematically strips away the remaining carbon bonds from the original glucose molecule, releasing carbon dioxide as a waste byproduct. The precise chemical steps of this hidden engine were mapped out by this scientist, Hans Adolf Krebs. Unraveling how cells harvest energy from food was such a crucial biological discovery that it earned him a Nobel Prize. In the final stage, the electron transport system, electrons cascade down protein complex. These protons power the creation of 36 to 38 ATP molecules. This entire high-yield system is only possible because of oxygen. Oxygen waits at the very end of the transport chain, catching the falling electrons and binding with hydrogen to safely form water. Without oxygen standing at the end of the line to catch those electrons, the entire system would instantly jam. The electron flow would back up, ATP production would halt, and the plant would eventually die. Pulling back from the microscopic machinery inside a single cell, we can finally see how the entire plant operates as a complete, unified system. We can clearly divide its life into 2 necessary halves. Photosynthesis is the act of capturing and storing solar energy in the form of sugar. Respiration is the required act of burning that sugar to actually use the energy. This balance is tracked by the respiratory quotient. Because of the specific chemistry of glucose, the plant consumes exactly 6 oxygen molecules to produce 6 carbon dioxide molecules, leaving a quotient of exactly 1. Animals are forced to constantly forage, hunt, and consume external resources to keep their cells fueled. But a plant is a self-contained factory. It silently manufactures its own fuel by day and breathes it in to power itself by night, maintaining a constant, unbroken cycle of life.